The Cessna 172 appeared on radar screens like a ghost materializing from the desert heat. Controllers at Nellis Air Force Base blinked at their displays, certain the blip was a malfunction. Commercial aircraft didn't simply materialize in restricted airspace 30 miles from classified weapons testing ranges. Yet there it was, a single-engine civilian aircraft cruising at 4,000 feet through the most heavily monitored airspace in North America. Tower, we have an unidentified civilian aircraft bearing 270, range 15 miles and closing, radioed Senior Airman Martinez, his voice tight with professional concern. The morning briefing had emphasized heightened security protocols. Foreign intelligence services had been probing American defenses with increasing boldness, and even civilian aircraft could mask sophisticated surveillance equipment. Within seconds, klaxons echoed through the alert hangar. Captain Kestrel Nighthawk Thorne was already suited up, having completed her pre-flight inspection 20 minutes early, a habit that had kept her alive through 3 combat deployments. Her call sign had been earned not through bravado, but through an almost supernatural ability to operate in darkness, to see threats others missed. Fellow pilots initially assumed it referenced her sharp features and keen eyes, but combat veterans knew better. Nighthawk hunted when others slept. She sprinted across the tarmac toward her F-16 Fighting Falcon, its sleek form cutting an imposing silhouette against the Nevada sunrise. The aircraft's sensors could detect a drone's heat signature from 40 miles away. Whatever was approaching had deliberately avoided commercial flight paths and air traffic control communications. In the post-9/11 world, such behavior triggered immediate military response. "Nighthawk, you're cleared for immediate intercept," crackled through her helmet communications as she strapped in. "Unknown aircraft, possible hostile intent, standard intercept protocols." Her hands moved across familiar controls with practiced precision. Engine startup, systems check, taxi clearance, each action executed with the fluid efficiency of someone who had performed these sequences hundreds of times under far more dangerous circumstances. The F-16's engine roared to life, 29,000 pounds of thrust preparing to launch her into the crystalline morning sky. As her aircraft lifted off, Kestrel's mind raced through threat assessments. Suicide bombers had used similar aircraft overseas. Drug smugglers regularly attempted border crossings with modified civilian planes. Industrial spies equipped Cessnas with cameras capable of reading license plates from 5 miles altitude. Her mission was simple: identify, intercept, and if necessary, neutralize any threat to national security. The unknown aircraft continued its steady approach, apparently oblivious to the military response it had triggered. Within minutes, she would be close enough to establish visual contact and determine whether America faced a genuine threat or simply dealt with another confused civilian pilot who had wandered into restricted airspace. But something about this intercept felt different. The aircraft's flight pattern seemed too deliberate, too purposeful for mere navigational error. Banking hard to starboard, Kestrel accelerated toward an encounter that would challenge everything she thought she knew about duty, judgment, and the true meaning of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The morning sun cast long shadows across the desert floor as 2 aircraft, one military, one civilian, raced toward a confrontation that would test the limits of military protocol and human compassion. Her radio crackled with updates from ground control, each transmission adding urgency to an already tense situation. Unknown aircraft, possible hostile intent, intercept and identify. Standard phrases that carried the weight of national security, yet somehow felt inadequate for whatever was about to unfold in the vast Nevada sky. The F-16's radar locked onto its target. Distance, 12 miles and closing fast. Kestrel's finger hovered near the radio transmission button, preparing to issue the standard warnings that preceded military engagement. She had no way of knowing that the next few minutes would transform a routine intercept into something far more profound. A reminder that behind every radar signature flew a human being with their own story, their own struggles, their own reasons for being exactly where they weren't supposed to be. The desert stretched endlessly below as two aircraft approached each other across a sky that held no room for misunderstanding, yet somehow demanded exactly that. Through her canopy, Kestrel could see the distant speck that represented potential threat or innocent mistake. Her training demanded she treat it as the former until proven otherwise. Her experience suggested that in military aviation, assumptions could kill, but her instincts, honed through years of reading situations that existed in the gray areas between black and white, whispered that this encounter might require something her training manuals had never covered. Ground control continued feeding her information: aircraft type, approximate speed, projected course. Cold, technical data that reduced human complexity to radar blips and radio frequencies. Yet as she closed the distance, Kestrel found herself wondering about the person inside that small aircraft. What circumstances had led them into restricted airspace? What story was about to unfold when she established visual contact? The morning sun climbed higher, burning away the last traces of dawn's gentle light and replacing it with the harsh clarity of full daylight. Soon, there would be no shadows to hide in, no ambiguity to soften the edges of whatever truth awaited her discovery. Military intercepts demanded clear answers to simple questions: friend or foe, threat or benign, comply or engage. But as Kestrel's F-16 streaked across the Nevada sky toward an unknown aircraft piloted by an unknown person for unknown reasons, she sensed that simple answers might prove elusive in the minutes ahead. Her radar showed 8 miles to intercept, time enough to review protocols, to mentally rehearse the procedures she might need to execute, time enough to wonder whether her next decision would be remembered as heroic or tragic, justified or excessive. In military aviation, the difference often became clear only in retrospect, after investigations and hearings and reports that reduced split-second decisions to carefully analyzed footnotes in official documentation. The unknown aircraft maintained course and speed, apparently unaware that it had triggered one of the most sophisticated military response systems on Earth. Whether through ignorance, malice, or desperation, someone had chosen to fly where they didn't belong. Now Kestrel had to determine their intentions before those intentions could threaten national security. Her radio squawked with a transmission from Nellie's tower: Nighthawk, unknown aircraft maintaining course toward restricted zone. ETA to weapons testing area, 14 minutes. You are authorized to use all necessary measures to prevent airspace violation. All necessary measures. Military euphemism for a range of actions that escalated from warning shots to lethal force. Kestrel had been authorized to take a life if circumstances demanded it. The weight of that responsibility settled over her shoulders like a familiar burden, one she had carried through combat missions over hostile territory where the rules of engagement were clear and the enemy wore uniforms. This felt different, more complicated, more personal. 6 miles to intercept. Soon she would be close enough to see into the other aircraft's cockpit, to make eye contact with whoever had triggered this response. Soon, the abstract threat on her radar screen would become a human face with human motivations, human fears, human reasons for being in the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. Kestrel's breathing steadied as she prepared for visual contact. Years of training had taught her to compartmentalize emotions, to focus on mission objectives rather than personal feelings. But something about this intercept felt different from the beginning, and that difference was about to become impossible to ignore. The desert floor rushed past below, unchanging and eternal, indifferent to the drama playing out in the sky above. 2 aircraft, 2 pilots, 2 sets of circumstances converging toward a moment that would test everything Kestrel believed about duty, compassion, and the thin line between following orders and following conscience. Her hands remained steady on the controls, her voice calm when she transmitted position updates to ground control. Professional competence masking the growing certainty that this intercept would demand decisions her training had never prepared her to make. 4 miles in closing. The morning sun reflected off her canopy as she banked slightly to adjust her approach vector. Standard intercept pattern, textbook execution, by-the-book professionalism applied to a situation that was about to prove anything but standard. The unknown aircraft continued its steady course, apparently oblivious to the military response bearing down on it. In 3 minutes, Kestrel would be close enough to establish visual identification. In 3 minutes, everything would change. Her radio crackled with final approach instructions from ground control. Professional voices maintaining operational discipline while managing a situation that could escalate from routine intercept to international incident in the space of a heartbeat. Military aviation demanded split-second decisions based on incomplete information, backed by training that assumed clear distinctions between right and wrong, threat and safety, enemy and innocent. But as Kestrel's F-16 streaked toward visual contact with an unknown aircraft in restricted airspace, she sensed that the next few minutes would challenge every assumption about clear distinctions. Some situations existed in the gray areas between protocol and judgment, between following orders and following instinct. 2 miles to intercept. Close enough now to see the small aircraft ahead, still too distant to identify specific details, but near enough to confirm that a single-engine civilian aircraft was indeed violating some of the most sensitive airspace in America. Close enough to know that whatever happened next would test her skills as both a military pilot and a human being trying to do the right thing in an impossibly complex situation. The moment of truth approached at 300 miles per hour, carried on desert winds that had witnessed decades of military secrets, and now prepared to witness one more encounter between duty and conscience, between protocol and compassion, between the letter of military law and the spirit of human understanding. Visual contact in 90 seconds, time enough for Kestrel to prepare for whatever revelation awaited her discovery. Time enough to remember that behind every military intercept flew real people with real lives, real problems, real reasons for being exactly where they weren't supposed to be. Her finger moved toward the radio transmission button, preparing to issue standard warnings to an aircraft that might contain a terrorist, a spy, a drug smuggler, or simply someone who had made a terrible navigational error at the worst possible time. In 90 seconds, she would begin to learn which possibility represented the truth. The F-16's engine hummed with contained power as Kestrel approached the moment when radar blips would become human faces, when abstract threats would become personal encounters, when military protocol would collide with human reality in the vast Nevada sky that held no room for misunderstanding, but somehow demanded exactly that. 60 seconds to visual contact. The desert sun climbed higher, burning away shadows and ambiguity with equal intensity, preparing to illuminate whatever truth awaited discovery in the cockpit of a small civilian aircraft that had wandered into the wrong airspace at exactly the wrong time for exactly the wrong reasons. Or perhaps Kestrel would soon discover, for exactly the right reasons after all. 30 seconds. Her radar lock remained solid, her approach vector perfect, her weapons systems ready. Everything proceeded according to textbook intercept procedures, yet somehow Kestrel sensed that textbooks might prove inadequate for whatever was about to unfold in the clear morning air above the Nevada desert. The unknown aircraft grew larger in her field of vision, still too distant for specific identification, but close enough to confirm what ground radar had already reported. A single-engine civilian aircraft, apparently a Cessna 172, flying straight and level through restricted airspace with apparent disregard for military security protocols that existed for very good reasons. 10 seconds to visual identification. Kestrel's training took over, suppressing speculation and focusing on immediate tactical requirements. Identify aircraft type. Assess potential threat level. Establish communication if possible. Execute appropriate response based on pilot compliance or resistance. Simple procedures for a situation that was about to prove anything but simple. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2. Visual contact established. Through her canopy, Kestrel could see the small aircraft clearly now. White fuselage with blue trim, civilian registration numbers clearly visible on the wings. A standard Cessna 172, exactly as ground radar had indicated. No obvious modifications, no visible weapon systems, no apparent surveillance equipment mounted externally. But something else caught her attention immediately. Something that transformed a routine military intercept into something far more personal and infinitely more complicated. The tail of the civilian aircraft bore markings that made Kestrel's breath catch in her throat. Not standard registration numbers or decorative graphics, but something that spoke to her military experience in ways that changed everything about this encounter. A small emblem near the aircraft's tail section. At this distance, details remained unclear, but the shape was unmistakable to anyone who had served in combat zones. It appeared to be a unit insignia, the kind worn by military personnel to identify their service branch, their specific unit, their deployment history. Military veterans sometimes displayed such emblems on civilian aircraft as tribute to their service. But this particular emblem looked familiar to Kestrel in ways that made her heart race with possibilities she didn't want to consider. Banking slightly to improve her viewing angle, she keyed her radio to establish communication with the unknown aircraft. Standard intercept protocols demanded immediate contact to determine pilot intentions and ensure compliance with military instructions. Unknown civilian aircraft bearing 270. This is United States Air Force interceptor on your right wing. You are in violation of restricted airspace. Identify yourself immediately and state your intentions. Static filled the radio channel for several seconds. Then a voice responded, male, middle-aged, with the controlled tension of someone trying to maintain composure under extreme stress. Air Force Interceptor, this is November 47 Delta Tango. I understand I'm in restricted airspace. I have an emergency situation. My daughter is critically injured and I'm trying to reach Sunrise Hospital in Las Vegas. GPS failed and I got turned around. I know this looks bad, but I need help, not trouble. The voice carried genuine distress, the kind that couldn't be faked by trained operatives or fabricated by actors attempting deception. Kestrel had heard similar tones from fellow pilots reporting battle damage, from soldiers calling for medical evacuation, from people facing impossible choices under impossible circumstances. But protocols existed for exactly such situations. Civilian medical emergencies didn't justify violation of restricted airspace, especially near sensitive military installations. Established procedures provided alternative routes for emergency flights, coordination with civilian air traffic control, escort services when circumstances truly demanded immediate military assistance. This aircraft had bypassed all established protocols and flown directly into restricted airspace without authorization or communication with proper authorities. Such behavior triggered automatic threat assessment procedures that assumed hostile intent until proven otherwise. Yet the tail emblem bothered her. Something about its shape and positioning suggested military service, possibly combat deployment. If the pilot was a veteran, he would understand the seriousness of airspace violations near military installations. He would know that his actions could trigger lethal response from interceptor aircraft. Why would a military veteran risk such an encounter unless circumstances truly demanded desperate measures? Keying her radio again, Kestrel maintained professional composure while gathering additional information. November 47 Delta Tango, describe the nature of your emergency and explain your current flight plan. Be advised that you are approaching weapons testing areas and must divert immediately. Another pause, longer this time. When the pilot's voice returned, it carried the weight of someone pushed beyond normal limits by circumstances beyond his control. Interceptor, my 8-year-old daughter fell from playground equipment this morning. Possible internal injuries, possible spinal damage. We live in rural Nevada, 40 miles from the nearest hospital. Local emergency services estimated 90 minutes by ambulance over rough terrain. My aircraft can reach Las Vegas in 30 minutes. I filed a flight plan, but my GPS failed somewhere over the desert and I've been flying by dead reckoning. I know I screwed up, but my little girl is unconscious in the back seat and I can't lose her. The emotional weight in his voice was unmistakable. Kestrel had been a military pilot long enough to distinguish between genuine distress and calculated performance. This man was telling the truth about his circumstances, even if his methods violated every protocol designed to protect national security. But military regulations didn't include provisions for sympathy. Restricted airspace remained restricted regardless of personal emergencies. Weapons testing schedules couldn't be delayed for civilian medical crises. National security protocols existed specifically to prevent unauthorized aircraft from accessing sensitive areas, regardless of pilot motivations. Her orders were clear. Escort the aircraft out of restricted airspace immediately. Coordinate with civilian authorities for proper emergency response. Ensure no compromise of classified military operations. Personal feelings about family emergencies couldn't override professional responsibilities to national security. Yet something about the tail emblem continued bothering her. At this distance and angle, she could make out additional details that confirmed her initial suspicions. The marking appeared to be a unit insignia from the 82nd Airborne Division, specifically the design used during deployments to Afghanistan between 2008 and 2012. If accurate, this pilot had served in combat zones where split-second decisions determined life and death outcomes. He would understand military necessity, would appreciate the impossible position he had created for the interceptor pilot. He would know that his actions could result in his aircraft being forced down or worse. Why would a combat veteran risk such consequences unless he truly faced impossible choices? Banking closer to the civilian aircraft, Kestrel could see through the Cessna's windows into the cockpit. The pilot appeared to be in his mid-30s, wearing civilian clothes but maintaining the upright posture common among former military personnel. His hands remained steady on the controls despite obvious stress, suggesting someone familiar with crisis management under pressure. More importantly, she could see into the aircraft's rear passenger area. A small form lay motionless on the back seat, a child, apparently unconscious, covered with what appeared to be a blanket. Even from this distance, the child's stillness was alarming. No movement, no response to the aircraft's motion, no sign of consciousness. The sight hit Kestrel like a physical blow. She had no children of her own, but she had witnessed enough military families torn apart by combat deployments to understand the fierce protectiveness parents felt toward their children, the desperate lengths they would go to ensure their children's safety. If this man's daughter was genuinely injured, possibly dying, his violation of restricted airspace took on different meaning. Not criminal intent or security threat, but parental desperation driving someone to risk everything for the chance to save his child's life. But military protocols didn't include exceptions for parental desperation. National security couldn't be compromised by sympathy for family emergencies. Her duty remained clear regardless of personal feelings about the situation. Keying her radio once more, Kestrel attempted to balance professional requirements with human compassion. November 47 Delta Tango, I can see your emergency situation. However, you must divert immediately to avoid entering active weapons testing areas. I can coordinate with Las Vegas Approach Control to expedite your arrival at Sunrise Hospital, but you cannot continue on your current heading." The response came immediately, with increased urgency that bordered on desperation. "Interceptor, please understand. Every minute counts. My daughter hasn't responded since we took off. If I divert around the restricted areas, it adds 15 minutes to our flight time. 15 minutes could be the difference between her living and dying. I'm begging you. I'll accept any consequences after we reach the hospital. But please don't make me fly the long way around while my little girl might be bleeding internally." The raw emotion in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't performance or manipulation, but genuine terror from a parent watching his child slip away, while bureaucratic procedures threatened to delay potentially life-saving medical treatment. Yet Kestrel's training emphasized that emotional manipulation was a common tactic used by hostile operatives to exploit military personnel's humanitarian instincts. Foreign intelligence services studied American military psychology extensively, understanding that appeals to family, children, and emergency situations could compromise operational security in ways that direct threats could not. Professional paranoia warred with human instinct as she maintained formation with the civilian aircraft. Every indication suggested genuine emergency, but military protocols existed specifically because genuine-appearing emergencies could mask sophisticated threats to national security. Her radio crackled with a transmission from Nellie's control tower. "Nighthawk, what's your assessment of the civilian aircraft? Weapons testing is scheduled to commence in 12 minutes. We need immediate resolution of this airspace violation." 12 minutes. The civilian aircraft's current speed and heading would put it directly over active weapons testing areas in approximately 10 minutes. If live-fire exercises proceeded on schedule, the civilian aircraft would be in extreme danger from military ordnance designed to destroy much larger targets. The situation had escalated beyond simple airspace violation. Now timing became a critical factor determining whether this encounter ended with successful emergency coordination or civilian casualties during military weapons testing. Kestrel's mind raced through available options. She could force the civilian aircraft to divert immediately, adding precious minutes to the medical emergency while ensuring no interference with weapons testing. She could request postponement of the testing schedule, creating operational delays that affected multiple military units while accommodating a single civilian emergency. She could escort the aircraft through restricted airspace at maximum speed, violating protocols but potentially saving critical time for the injured child. Each option carried professional and personal consequences that extended far beyond this single encounter. Military careers had been destroyed by decisions to prioritize humanitarian concerns over operational security. But military careers had also been destroyed by decisions that prioritized operational security over obvious humanitarian emergencies. Banking slightly closer to the civilian aircraft, Kestrel tried to get a better view of the child in the back seat. What she saw made her decision infinitely more difficult. The little girl appeared to be completely motionless, with an alarming pallor visible even through the aircraft's windows. Her father periodically looked back at her, with the desperate expression of someone watching the most important thing in his world slip away, while feeling completely helpless to prevent it. Kestrel had seen that expression before, on the faces of soldiers carrying wounded comrades, on military families receiving notification of combat casualties, on parents in war zones trying to protect their children from circumstances beyond anyone's control. The sight triggered memories of her own military service, of missions where following orders conflicted with following conscience, where military necessity demanded decisions that felt wrong on every human level but right on every professional level. Now she faced a similar choice: follow protocols that protected national security while potentially costing a child's life, or violate protocols that protected national security while potentially saving a child's life. Her radio squawked with another transmission from the civilian pilot. Interceptor, I need to tell you something about my military service. I'm retired Army 82nd Airborne, served 3 tours in Afghanistan. I know what I'm asking of you. I know the position I've put you in. I would never compromise operational security except under these circumstances. My daughter Emma is everything to me. Her mother died in a car accident 2 years ago. She's all I have left. I'm begging you, help me save her. The unit insignia on his aircraft's tail suddenly made complete sense. This was indeed a combat veteran, someone who understood military necessity, someone who would never lightly compromise security protocols unless circumstances truly demanded desperate measures. But knowledge of his military background only complicated her decision. A combat veteran would understand the consequences of airspace violations better than civilian pilots. He would know that his actions could trigger lethal response. He would appreciate the impossible position he had created for the interceptor pilot. If he was willing to risk such consequences, his daughter's condition must be truly critical. Yet military protocols existed specifically because personal emergencies couldn't override national security requirements. Weapons testing schedules coordinated multiple units across several time zones. Delays rippled through complex operational chains that affected training schedules, deployment preparations, equipment certifications critical to combat readiness. One civilian emergency, however tragic, couldn't justify compromising systems designed to protect national interests. But looking at the motionless child in the aircraft's back seat, Kestrel found military logic increasingly difficult to accept. This wasn't abstract discussion of protocol versus policy, but immediate choice between following orders and potentially watching a child die, because bureaucratic procedures mattered more than human life. Her training emphasized that such thinking was exactly how enemy operatives exploited American military personnel's humanitarian instincts. Appeal to children, create emotional pressure, force split-second decisions that compromised operational security in service of manufactured humanitarian crises. But this didn't feel manufactured. The pilot's distress appeared genuine, the child's condition alarming, the circumstances desperately authentic in ways that suggested real emergency rather than sophisticated deception. Kestrel keyed her radio to contact Nellie's control tower. Control, this is Nighthawk. I have visual confirmation of medical emergency aboard civilian aircraft. Request immediate coordination with Las Vegas. Approach control for emergency routing to Sunrise Hospital. Also recommend temporary postponement of weapons testing to ensure civilian safety. Static filled the channel for several seconds before the response came, carrying the barely controlled frustration of personnel managing complex operations under time pressure. Negative, Nighthawk. Weapons testing involves multiple agencies and cannot be postponed for civilian emergencies. Escort the aircraft out of restricted airspace immediately and coordinate with civilian authorities for standard emergency response. This is direct order from base commander. Direct order, military language that eliminated discretion, removed personal judgment, demanded immediate compliance regardless of circumstances. Kestrel had received similar orders during combat missions, where humanitarian concerns conflicted with tactical objectives. She had always followed such orders, trusting that military leadership possessed broader perspective on situations that seemed clear-cut from individual viewpoints, but proved far more complex when considered within larger strategic contexts. But those orders had involved combat zones where enemy action threatened military personnel, where tactical objectives served broader strategic purposes, where following orders protected American lives, even when it required difficult choices regarding civilian populations. This situation felt different. No enemy action, no strategic objectives, no military lives at stake. Only a parent desperately trying to save his child's life, while bureaucratic procedures threatened to delay potentially life-saving medical treatment. The civilian pilot's voice crackled through her radio again, more desperate than before. "Interceptor, please, I can see you talking to your base. Don't let them force us to divert. My daughter's lips are turning blue. I think she's going into shock. Every minute counts. I'll accept any punishment, any consequences, but please help me get her to the hospital." Blue lips suggested respiratory distress, possibly from internal injuries affecting lung function. If accurate, the child's condition was deteriorating rapidly. 15 additional minutes in flight could indeed mean the difference between life and death. But military orders didn't include provisions for medical assessments by unqualified personnel. Fighter pilots weren't trained to evaluate civilian medical emergencies. Following emotional appeals rather than professional protocols was exactly how enemy operatives exploited American military personnel. Yet looking at the motionless child, Kestrel found it increasingly difficult to dismiss this as potential enemy operation. The pilot's distress appeared genuine, the child's condition alarming, the circumstances authentic in ways that suggested real emergency rather than sophisticated deception. Her radio crackled with another transmission from Nellie's control. "Nighthawk, we show civilian aircraft continuing toward weapons testing area. You are ordered to force immediate diversion using all necessary measures. Weapons testing commences in 8 minutes." All necessary measures. Military euphemism that included warning shots, forced landing, and if circumstances demanded, lethal force to prevent compromise of classified operations. Kestrel's finger hovered over her weapons system's controls. Standard procedure required escalating warnings followed by demonstration of force if civilian aircraft refused to comply with military instructions. Her F-16 carried sufficient firepower to destroy the civilian aircraft instantly if circumstances demanded such action. The thought of firing on an aircraft containing an injured child made her physically ill. But military service sometimes demanded actions that felt wrong on personal level while serving larger purposes on professional level. Her training emphasized that personal feelings couldn't override professional responsibilities. Military personnel who allowed emotional considerations to compromise operational security endangered countless lives beyond their immediate awareness. But her experience suggested that blindly following orders without considering human consequences led to decisions that haunted military personnel for the rest of their lives, decisions that served no strategic purpose while causing unnecessary suffering. Banking closer to the civilian aircraft, she could see the pilot looking back at his daughter with increasing desperation. The child remained motionless, her pallor more pronounced than before, whether from medical crisis or optical illusion created by changing light conditions. She appeared to be deteriorating rapidly. If this was genuine medical emergency, forcing the aircraft to divert could cost critical time needed to save the child's life. If this was sophisticated deception, allowing the aircraft to continue could compromise classified military operations. Wrong decision, either direction, carried consequences that extended far beyond this single encounter. Military careers, civilian lives, national security, personal conscience, all balanced on split-second judgment based on incomplete information under extreme time pressure. Kestrel's radio crackled with transmission from the civilian pilot, his voice now carrying the controlled panic of someone watching disaster unfold while feeling completely powerless to prevent it. "Interceptor, my daughter just stopped breathing. I can see her chest isn't moving. I'm going to attempt CPR as soon as we land, but I need to reach that hospital now. Please, I know you have orders, but this is my little girl. She's 8 years old. She likes horses and wants to be a veterinarian. She doesn't deserve to die because I made navigation error." The raw emotion was unmistakable. This wasn't performance or manipulation, but genuine terror from parent watching child slip away, while military procedures threatened to delay potentially life-saving medical intervention. Yet enemy operatives were trained to exploit exactly such emotional vulnerabilities. Foreign intelligence services understood that appeals involving children could compromise American military judgment in ways that direct threats could not achieve. Professional paranoia warred with human instinct as Kestrel maintained formation with the civilian aircraft. Every indication suggested genuine emergency, but military protocols existed specifically because genuine-appearing emergencies could mask sophisticated threats. Her radio squawked with final warning from Nellie's control. "Nighthawk, weapons testing commences in 5 minutes. You are ordered to neutralize airspace violation immediately. This is your final authorization." 5 minutes. The civilian aircraft's current speed and heading would put it directly over active weapons testing areas in approximately 4 minutes. If live-fire exercises proceeded on schedule, the aircraft would be destroyed by military ordnance regardless of anyone's intentions. Time had run out for gradual escalation or careful consideration. Immediate action was required to prevent either compromise of classified operations or civilian casualties during weapons testing. Kestrel's finger moved toward her weapon system's controls while her mind raced through final options. Force the aircraft down with warning shots, accepting possible medical consequences for the child. Request emergency postponement of weapons testing, accepting professional consequences for protocol violations. Escort the aircraft through restricted airspace at maximum speed, accepting security consequences for unauthorized access. Each choice carried risks that extended far beyond this encounter. But looking at the motionless child in the aircraft's back seat, one choice suddenly seemed less risky than the others. Keying her radio, she made the decision that would define the rest of her military career. November 47 Delta Tango, this is your escort to Sunrise Hospital. Follow my lead and maintain maximum speed. We're going direct route through restricted airspace under emergency protocols. I'll coordinate with Las Vegas Approach Control for priority landing clearance." The response from the civilian pilot carried the relief of someone who had been prepared for the worst but received unexpected salvation. "Thank you, Interceptor. You're saving my daughter's life. I won't forget this." But before Kestrel could acknowledge his gratitude, her radio erupted with furious transmission from Nellie's control. "Nighthawk, you are ordered to abort escort mission immediately. Return to base for disciplinary action. Civilian aircraft will be intercepted by backup fighters with orders to use lethal force if necessary." Lethal force. Military language that eliminated ambiguity about consequences for continued airspace violation. Backup interceptors would receive orders to destroy the civilian aircraft if it refused to comply with diversion instructions. Kestrel's decision had triggered military response that could result in the very outcome she was trying to prevent: civilian casualties caused by military action against aircraft containing injured child. But backup interceptors were still several minutes away from intercept position. The civilian aircraft could reach Las Vegas airspace before additional military units arrived to enforce lethal response authorization. If she could escort the aircraft to civilian air traffic control jurisdiction, hospital emergency crews could be standing by for immediate medical response when they landed. The child would receive professional medical treatment within minutes rather than dying in aircraft seat, while military protocols demanded compliance with security procedures. Banking hard to port, Kestrel positioned her F-16 between the civilian aircraft and the direction from which backup interceptors would approach. standard military procedure for protecting friendly aircraft from hostile action, now being used to protect civilian aircraft from military action. Her radio crackled with increasingly urgent transmissions from multiple sources. Nellie's control demanding immediate compliance with orders. Las Vegas approach control requesting clarification of emergency aircraft status. The civilian pilot providing updates on his daughter's deteriorating condition. Professional voices managing crisis situation that had escalated beyond normal protocols, beyond standard procedures, beyond clear distinctions between right and wrong action. Kestrel ignored all radio traffic except essential navigation coordination with Las Vegas approach control. Her decision was made, her course set, her consequences accepted. Whatever professional discipline awaited her return to base paled in significance compared to immediate necessity of ensuring injured child received medical treatment. The backup interceptors appeared on her radar display, approaching fast from the northeast. Two F-16s with orders to use lethal force against civilian aircraft if necessary to prevent compromise of classified military operations. Time was running out for peaceful resolution. Within minutes, this encounter would escalate to level where military aircraft fired on civilian aircraft containing injured child, or where military pilot violated direct orders to protect civilian aircraft from military action. Either outcome would create international incident, congressional investigations, media coverage that portrayed American military as either heartless bureaucracy that prioritized paperwork over children's lives or undisciplined force that ignored orders when emotions overrode professional judgment. But looking at the motionless child in the civilian aircraft, Kestrel found such considerations increasingly irrelevant. Military careers, international incidents, congressional investigations, all seemed less important than immediate necessity of getting 8-year-old girl to hospital before she died from injuries that might be treatable if she received prompt medical attention. Her radar showed backup interceptors closing rapidly. Distance, 8 miles and approaching at combat speed. They would be in weapons range within 90 seconds, close enough to engage the civilian aircraft with cannon fire or short-range missiles. Keying her radio to the civilian pilot, Kestrel provided final escort instructions. November 47 Delta Tango, Las Vegas approach control is clearing you for emergency landing on runway 24 left. Emergency medical crews are standing by. Follow my lead for final approach, then proceed directly to terminal for immediate ambulance transfer. The civilian pilot's response carried gratitude mixed with desperate urgency. Roger, interceptor. My daughter's still not breathing, but I can feel weak pulse. Hospital emergency crews better be ready because we're coming in hot. Coming in hot. Military slang for high-speed approach under emergency conditions. The civilian pilot's use of military terminology confirmed his combat background, his understanding of tactical situations, his appreciation for risks being taken on his behalf. Banking toward Las Vegas McCarran International Airport, Kestrel could see the city sprawling across the desert floor, its buildings and highways creating geometric patterns that looked almost artificial against the natural landscape. Somewhere in that urban maze, Sunrise Hospital's emergency crews were preparing to receive critically injured child whose life had been saved by military pilots' decision to prioritize human compassion over professional protocol. Her radar showed backup interceptors had closed to weapons range, but had not yet received authorization to engage. Military command was probably struggling with decision to authorize lethal force against aircraft clearly involved in medical emergency, especially with media monitoring military radio frequencies for newsworthy incidents. Shooting down civilian aircraft carrying injured child would create public relations disaster that overshadowed any security concerns about restricted airspace violations. Congressional hearings,